Bonsoir à tous et à toutes. Je vais faire une très brève introduction pour vous remercier d'être ici et surtout remercier Kiki Smith et Petra Giloy-Hirtz d'être présentes ce soir. Comme vous le savez, ce soir, nous sommes très heureux d'accueillir l'artiste qui reprend l'avion demain. Donc, il nous fait la gentillesse de passer encore un petit peu de temps avec nous. C'est une artiste très importante, magnifique artiste, dont c'est la première grande exposition en France. Elle a déjà bénéficié de nombreuses rétrospectives aux États-Unis et en Europe. Une sculpteur qui travaille aussi la tapisserie, le dessin, le verre, la cire, toutes les techniques, et qui a eu pour particularité, dès les années 80, de représenter la femme, le corps féminin, de manière tout à fait nouvelle et différente, et remettre ce corps et ces personnages féminins au centre d'une histoire qu'elle réécrit au fur et à mesure. Pour ceux qui n'ont pas encore vu l'exposition, j'espère que vous pourrez y revenir et la voir en détail et découvrir comment Kiki Smith réinvente aussi bien la Vierge Marie que Alice au Pays des Merveilles ou Sainte Geneviève ou encore Marie-Madeleine. Donc toutes ces femmes dans des récits bibliques ou contes et légendes qu'elle va remettre à l'honneur et replacer au centre du monde. Ce soir, elle sera en conversation avec une grande spécialiste de son travail, Petra Giloy-Hirtz, une commissaire d'exposition depuis 1993, mais qui avant, dans une première vie, était professeure de littérature médiévale à l'université de Düsseldorf. Et ce n'est pas totalement un hasard d'ailleurs qu'une spécialiste de l'histoire médiévale devienne une spécialiste de Kiki Smith, puisque Kiki Smith s'intéresse beaucoup au Moyen-Âge, et ça sera peut-être un des sujets de discussion de ce soir. Petra, depuis donc 1993, est commissaire, éditeur, publie beaucoup de catalogues. Elle a notamment travaillé sur Julian Schnabel, David Lynch, Dennis Hopper, et donc plus récemment une rétrospective de Kiki Smith, qui a voyagé à Munich, à Vienne et en Finlande. Et enfin, tout à fait récemment, une grande exposition aussi à Oxford de Kiki Smith autour des tapisseries et des éditions, des gravures notamment. Donc je suis encore une fois très heureuse de vous accueillir toutes les deux ce soir et je vous laisse la parole. Merci.
Camille, thank you so much for your kind words. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm happy for the invitation and thank you. And I would like to say that I'm very happy to welcome Kiki Smith tonight. And Kiki, I think on behalf of all of us, I would like to thank you for being here, and I would like to congratulate you for this very beautiful exhibition at La Monnaie. So please help me and let's welcome Kiki Smith. Just a few words. I think you probably have wandered around the exhibition and have seen the show, the sculptures, the large ones, the small ones, the tapestry drawing, printmaking, and perhaps you have been amazed about the incredible inventiveness in Kiki Smith imagery, about the magic of the materials the artist uses, and beyond the beauty, the sensitiveness and power, you have recognized the ethic dimension, the deep humanness of this oeuvre. However, I think this work gives just a glimpse in the spectrum of Kiki Smith's diverse practice over more than 3 decades now. And I think there's such a huge reservoir of ideas, of manifestations and perceptions of the world. So you have ideals, utopias, provocations, visions. And in this sense, I think her work, I talk about you, only a few more words. I think her work is a profound gift, as Kiki Smith provides for us both a spiritual and an intellectual home. So, and this is only my statement, because when you walk around, you see all these beautiful sculptures, the tapestries and everything, and I think in all its beauty, the work has an immense political implication, and it shows us the artist's vision of the society in which people and nature, life and death, the feminine and the masculine coexist in a balance, emphasizing friendship, survival, and protection. And I think in conversation with the artist, perhaps we find out a little bit more of this. We have prepared a series of images, but Kiki says we could just talk about what we want. So these images will flow here, and sometimes I will try to make a reference to the images. But I think as Camille so kindly has introduced Kiki in the sense of this enormous welcome she had in Europe these last month or 2 years, while she is so very famous in the States all her life long and is in all famous collections, public and private ones, and exhibitions wherever, you know, the MoMA and wherever. I mean, you can read this in the biography. But this incredible welcome in Europe, it's wonderful, I think, and there is really a traveling, and Kiki is always on the road, and therefore I thought I just ask this more personal question. What is so very special for you about being in Paris? I mean, when I look around here, what do you think about being in Paris and build up this beautiful show?
First, I can say thank you to the people who made this show possible, because it was a very collective and large endeavor and a great deal of work on many people's part, and I'm very appreciative to them. I mean, you know, the second is like, what's not to like about being in Paris? I mean, first, in reality, my sister Seaton lives here, so that's really my biggest main connection to it. But you know, I have had very little time in the last week to myself, and I had all these ambitions to go to museums, and then I thought, you know, the best thing of being here is just walking around in the streets and seeing the beautiful light, and we've been blessed with good weather while we've been here. And, you know, but just the architecture and the form of the city is the most beautiful. And being someone who failed French 2 years in a row and had to go to summer school for it, I speak like practically no French whatsoever, and so I really also very much appreciate the metro system, because I don't have to speak to anyone at all. Although I realized, like on one day, I put my card in, and then I was just standing there expecting for the things to open, and it had one of these turnstiles, and I had to push, you know, and then I went back, I said, oh, it's not working, and I had to get another ticket, and then, you know, they said, you have to like push, you know, and like, you know, when you're a foreigner, all the things that you take for granted in being in a place, you have no reference to, or, you know, like, people just look at you like you're just a complete moron. I mean, here in England, too, I couldn't figure out how to turn on a television because it was different or something, you know, and so you're sort of in this calamity, even if you're trying never to have any speaking interaction with anyone, to be, not to be polluting people's ears with your bad French. You're still don't know what's happening. You know, it's hard to have an entrance into a culture, but it's certainly beautiful being here. So, you know, and it was really beautiful. I think only yesterday afternoon when everything was in, and then I walked through here, and then I thought, you know, it's not so bad to have such an opportunity to show, because I had it once in this show in Avignon, La Papesse, about with Louise Bourgeois, and Camille Claudel, and Jana Sturbach, and Belinda de Brücke, and myself. And it also was a building, it was the Yvon Lambert Foundation, and it was a building with these big windows, you know, and there are really few places in the world you have such light coming in. I mean, the people must have been freezing to death, you know, 100 years ago, but to have these light coming into spaces is very, very unusual. Where I live, the windows are very, very small, because it was Dutch, and people wanted the windows to, you know, it was cold and they wanted closed windows. So to be in light first is the best thing, one of the best things of being here, that you have this light facade, color of a facade to reflect the light everywhere. It's not bad.
Yeah, I mean, these are palaces to show your work. When we go back to the very beginning, the situation was much rougher.
We can turn these
And
things.
no, yes, I know,
Oh, you
I
can turn
am
it.
responsible
Okay,
for
good.
this. We start.
Yeah. You can, I don't know how you have to
It
press
doesn't
it
work.
towards something. Yeah.
Okay. we start with Kiki Smith. This is a piece of her own blood. And I thought we start with this because this early work of Kiki Smith, being completely dedicated to the body, to its fluids, to the organs, to the inside of the body before she gets to the outside of the body, this was your beginning. And I thought we give you a chance by letting go these images. Some pieces you have really in the exhibition, as this one is in the vitrine here. So Kiki, perhaps you could talk a little about your interest in the body and the very beginning, because this is the base of your work before you then widen later to different subjects.
Yeah, I liked drawing pictures of plants, and then I liked my sister Seton made still lifes. My father made still lifes, so then Seton did, and then I tried to copy Seton, so I was trying to learn to draw. And then I was making paintings of my boyfriend's guitar and his friends' guitars, and then he brought me a book of Gray's Anatomy, and then like I just zoomed into it. I mean, it was like all of a sudden waking up and having, my mother would, when we were children, would say to pray for your vocation, to pray for your calling, to find your calling. And, I got Gray's Anatomy and I found my calling. It just became evident. And then for 10 years, I didn't really think much about what I was doing at all. I just did it, because it was like a whole enormous language to speak through.
And you started with doing first the inner parts of the body, like arms and legs and organs, before you then come to the whole entire figure?
Well, first internal, cells. I mean, I went like, not on purpose, but only in retrospect. I went from painting cells to organs, to systems in the body, and then to the fluids that are in the body or coming out of the body, and then to the skin, to the meat, to the flesh, and then to the skin. And then once you're in the skin, you're in figuration and the whole history of figuration, and you're in all of these, other issues about statuary or dolls or puppets or portraiture or race or age or, gender thing. You're in all of this other stuff that for me I never had any interest in. But once you permeate and penetrate into the outside world, you're sort of in that landscape. So it just happened. It was certainly not on purpose, because I think 5 years before I did it, I would go like, oh no, I don't want to make portraits of anything or make my version of figuration. I thought I have nothing to say about figuration or anything like that, but it just happens.
So things have evolved and developed, but I think that this was in the 80s, and that the situation, the political and historical, economical, cultural situation in New York was a very special one, with all these discussions about gender, about sexuality, abortion, the AIDS crisis. So you would say that you have been influenced by this whole milieu of...
Well, all those things are happening in your life. It's not like you don't have to look outside your life. It is your life, all those things, and how all those things are affecting you. Sometimes they're affecting you very dramatically, and sometimes, maybe more in a theoretical way or something like that. But in general, I always like that thing of Bob Dylan saying, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. That it's evident, and it's forcibly evident, and more forcibly evident when you're young, because you're having to, learn to stand autonomously.
So that this is also a kind of development of growing up and getting adult and learn more about your own body. So when you collect the fluids, or you write a diary about how you feel and how the fluids are, or you make these digestive systems.
I mean, I wasn't into collecting fluids. I'm not that religious.
No. Yeah.
I mean, I took some blood out of my body but I took it out specifically to make slides or something. I mean, I made all these jars with fluid in them, but I thought you don't need the fluid because people already remember always, they said, oh, you had those jars with all the fluids, but you just need the word. Like the rest of your imagination is visceral enoughly engaged that it fills them up with whatever you say.
Yeah.
So, and I'm much more, not like an abstract person, but I'm not that in the physical realm to begin with. Like I think people think I'm like churning in the flesh, but I'm like, still just trying to touch the ground a little bit. Like I used to wear about, at first like being about 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, but then I would wear another, 5 or 10 pounds of jewelry or weights on me or something like just, I thought, oh, I guess you just need to get on the ground. And now I don't care because now I have to go the other direction and think about that more than getting here.
Yeah.
So.
But the memory of the past, I mean, I think it's always interesting to know where the artist is coming from. So, and I think as Kiki Smith comes from an artistic, intellectual milieu, especially because her father was an artist and you have had these influences with your sisters very early, it's quite nice to draw this line when you look at you today, and this is always a subject in your art, getting older, growing, age. Death is a very substantial subject in the center of your work. So if you would put a line from these early days, you feel very much influenced and that you kind of owe a lot to these kind of inspirations you got from your home.
Yeah, I mean, I owe a lot to my parents and to my sisters, I mean, I owe everybody, but I owe particularly my parents and sisters because we had a very close family and it very much revolved around art or my father's making things, and we helped in the production of him making things, so we learned to work, which I had like zero interest in as a child or a teenager. I tried to get out of it as much as possible. But as an adult, it has really come in handy that I really know how to work. And, all the things that I hated as a child ended up being immensely beneficial as an adult and as an artist, just being able to show up for yourself and to see, like my father, he was very engaged in his work and he didn't let go of that engagement. He held it, and it had nothing to do with what else was happening, in his personal life or in, like the idea of having a career or anything. He was just engaged in his work. And, if you want to be an artist, that you have, it's self-defining, but it's self-motivating. And then also all the ways I work come from my father, essentially, we sat as teenagers folding billions of pieces of paper, making octahedrons and tetrahedrons, and then putting them together, and then he would come and move them around, and then, maybe make a sculpture out of that, and then we'd take them apart and then move them around. And, we did a lot of that. And, it wasn't till like 10 or 15 years into making things that my friend who had known my parents said, you're working exactly like your father, of making components of things and then collaging them and reordering them. And, I'm doing it in a very representational narrative way, but it's still very much the same kind of process. And also, like I always say, my father's an abstract expressionist. He was born 1912, which is like Jackson Pollock and John Cage. He's not a minimalist, really. I mean, he made some pieces that are very succinct in their geometry, but most of his work is completely enigmatic and unknowable from one vantage to the next. And while they do have this base in geometry, and I think people had like a hard time understanding that geometry was as expressive, and it's certainly the building of all expression, but as expressive as anything else. But you know, I just see that totally the way I work comes from my father.
This is an enormous correction of a kind of prejudice that one would say Kiki Smith, she works with poor material, she works with her hands, she works in a small scale, and she works figurative, and there is a lot of emotion and pathos and subjects like death and friendship and whatever in her work, and putting this opposite to the father's work, which is just not the case.
Oh, my father's work is much more expressive than my work, and has much more pathos and much more depth, you know, much more everything than mine. You know, no, I think people always try to make that, you know, like I remember I gave a talk once and they said, this teacher got up and he said, well, your father made geometric sculptures, how come you don't? And I felt like you're out of your mind, like what kind of person thinks such a stupid thing as that? But I didn't say that, but I remembered it because, or they try to make like you're doing something different than your father, so therefore you're in opposition to him. And I thought, I am completely in debt to my family, you know, to all aspects of my family. And, you know, so it's not it feels completely familiar to me, my father's work. You know, it's like in my veins, and my sister's is, you know, I know it intuitively and I know it emotionally. You know, but we're all having different, and we're all different, you know, we're different, we're very different people. But I think for me, the best thing that, one of the best things was I watched a TV show of my father talking, and he was talking about why he did things, and then he said, you know, I just want to see what it looks like. And I thought, I am my father's daughter, you know, because that's really, you know, like I made that Rapture, the wolf, you know, like the grandmother coming out of the wolf in the Little Red Riding Hood, and so I made it this woman walking out of a wolf, like being born. And, you know, I have no, like, agenda or idea of what it means. I just wanted to see what physically it looks like, you know, because it was really like you're being born, you know, and, you know, it's also like horizontal and verticals. What do horizontal and verticals mean and do when you're in the presence of them? And, you know, so you know, I think in general, artists just want to see what it looks like. You know, if you take your energy out of your body and smash it into something, or, you know, make some collaboration with some lumpant material, yeah, it's always like a model or a proof or something, just to kind of turn around and look at and see if it does anything, you know, or if it doesn't do anything, and then you have to go back to work again.
And suddenly there a sculpture evolves like Virgin Mary, no skin, no hair, and it just evolves out of experimentation.
No, those evolved out because I really, you know, I saw when I first went to Vienna in '93, I saw these wax figures that were made for teaching anatomy. And I think I went to Dresden. I took a train once to go see one, and it was closed, and I was really angry that I'd, like, you know, taken 2 hours to take a train someplace, and the museum was closed. I was mad at myself, and then I went home and I thought, I'm just going to make my own. And so at first I made them just as out of paper, out of cutting paper, like Japanese paper balloons, and then I made, like, I think, yeah, I can make my own écoché. I mean, this is like a traditional way you can learn about, you know, you make a skeleton, then you put the muscles, the musculature on the body, and you take, you know, maybe like 3 months you do that in school, really doing it. And so I did it the opposite. I cast someone's body in plaster bandage and filled it with beeswax, and then filled it with red wax underneath, and then I carved back the muscles. So it was, you know, kind of working the opposite direction. But I think also that's another big impetus of being an artist is just wanting to have things, you know. I thought anything you can imagine to have, you can make it. You know, you might have to make this at a smaller scale to start or something, but, you know, you can just make it. And it is a big part of, I mean, possession in a certain way is, you know, and trying to learn about the physical world, but also have the physical world, you know. And we grew up with extremely little things. We had very little things in our entire house. And, you know, in any room, I always say there's more than was in our entire house. So, you know, that made me very covetous when I was young. I wanted everything. Like, you know, if I came to Paris, I would look in every single shop and want every single thing in it. Because you could learn about the world through that. And, you know, now I see that, like, I made it through a week. And I bought some, you know, buckwheat cookies at Boilen to bring home to my friend. But, you know, like I thought, I'm doing much better. But I also know more now. I don't need everything around me as much. You know, my own things or other people's things, you know.
But nevertheless, with these figures, and therefore I put so much time on this one, because it's in the exhibition, as you know, and I think it's quite moving and touching to stand across her, also the gestures of the open hands and all of this, so that you really have created a different kind of representation of the female figure. I mean, when you look at Virgin Mary, or even this sculpture upside down with the horsehair you find in the exhibition, this is not Eve, the object of desire, and this is not Mary, the Immaculate. These are different figures, different representation of the female, which at the time people were shocked about and didn't want to see it, or even criticized it very loud, because this is a way. We have an upside down figure with the beads also in one of these beautiful smaller rooms, which give them an intimacy. They were against taboos, or in this humiliation kind of poses and postures, women have not been presented. So.
You know, I thought should be a lot bigger taboo at the time that, you know, like in Catholicism, sexuality and divinity were separated. You know, and to me, that should be a lot bigger taboo than when I was a, you know, 24, 25, or 30-year-old having, you know, like, you know, try to mend the damage done to my psyche and every other human being on earth psyche from separating divinity and fecundity and sexuality, which religions have, not all religions have done, but certain religions have done. And that has caused irreparable damage that will take centuries. Even if those religions blow off the face of the earth, there will still be damage in our psyches for, you know, many, many generations till some really more holistic, inclusive, you know, paradigm shift happens, and we're, you know, happy, joyous, and free. But, you know, so to me, a lot of this work, you know, came from, you know, like that the Virgin Mary is robbed of her flesh, you know, I mean, she's turned into a spirit rather than, or, you know, rather than like the Mary Magdalene, something like groveling in the dirt, you know, and those were these extremes that are hurtful, you know, and certainly, you know, I as a young woman had to wrestle with these things a lot. Now I don't think about it so much anymore, because, you know, I just don't think about it anymore, because who cares now? But you know, when you're young, you have to really try to mend those things, scar people, and, you know, so you have to make, you can do that through making art, or you can, you know, learn to dance, or do something else. I don't know, something else in your life, but, you know, to me, making things was a way to kind of, you know, try to patch myself. You know, it's like, also because we all grew up post-Frankenstein. And, you have that like Osiris. You have this ruptured body that then is sewn back together and put together. But the whole 20th century was a time of fragmentation of a holistic idea, that had tried to exist at other times. And so, so the people are, me, I'm sewn back together in various arrangements or something like that, but it's a ruptured, I have a ruptured psyche. I'm not perfect like a plant, so I think those are, a lot of my work when I was younger was about all that, conflictedness and anger and, being pissed off and, trying to survive oneself and survive the society that one inherits, and all the useless, really detrimental things that exist in societies.
What I find very interesting, because what you say about religion, if I may come back to this, because I thought Kiki always said she has grown up in a Catholic milieu, and I thought always that the stories, the narrative of religion is a source for you for your invention, so more in a positive sense, giving energy, giving images, stories, which you then bring together in your own language. But in fact, it's more the experience of destruction or
No, it's both. It's both. I mean, first, I didn't grow up that Catholic. My mother was a convert to Catholicism because my father was raised Catholic. My father was raised Jesuit. He never went to church a day in his life after, from the time I met him. But he read he did read the Bible at times, and my mother, after getting us sort of raised, became much more interested in, she said the rosary, but she also was very, interested in Hinduism and Buddhism, and, used to hang out with the Dalai Lama and went to Dharamsala for a couple of months and stuff. And, so, and in the 60s, if you grew up in the 60s, like the Beatles, relationship with Maharishi, these things just totally changed everything. And many Americans went to India and many people all over Europe too, or all over the whole world, but went to India and went, all over Asia and were deeply influenced. For 100 years or 200 years already, but, John Cage and all of those people were influenced by the Zen Buddhists, and that was very influential, certainly in the art world. And, the whole world was influenced more by the opening up of the world to different cultures. And, so I'm not a good Catholic. Or I am a really good Catholic, maybe. I don't know. But at the same time, like, I love the Virgin Mary. I pray to the Virgin Mary to intercede in, when I'm going down slippery slopes, of my own doing for the most part. Or I pray, on behalf of others' well-being or something like that. And I love the fetishism of religious belief, or the fetishism of spirituality. I love, to think about what a threshold is when you enter a church, to cross a threshold, and what that means spiritually to cross a threshold, or what does a baptism mean, or what does an altar mean. These are incredibly rich histories, and beautiful histories filled with aspirations. There's just like a whole lot of other very bad sides of it all, like us and everything else here,
I now understand that you are also the daughter of your mother, because you are so curious in the sense that you are looking to other religions, that you are traveling around also in the sense of through times and spaces to see other kind of cultures, distant cultures, which attract you in your work. You know, there is Buddhism, there is Asian art, there's so many different things you draw from, especially in the context of spirituality. Perhaps we can come to this a little bit later. What I would like to ask you, because of this fragmentation, and to talk about the situation of the 20th century, if you see that your work tries to create something like a summa, a whole, an entire thing, a wholeness, something which has been lost in the world. If this is not too pathetic to say, but you know what I mean.
No, I think the universe is a whole. You know, it is whole, it is complete. You know, otherwise I think it would just explode. You know, I always think it's all just love, or it's an agreement. This is all an agreement of everything, or else it would just like disappear in a second. And it's us who don't understand. You know, it's our shortcomings that doesn't understand. And it's, you know, but I definitely think this is all the same, you know, here and outside, and as far as one can go, it's all within the same field.
But this is something which your work expresses, let's say, until since the end of the 90s, so that you think Kiki Smith first looks at her body, her environment, to the figure, and then there is this immensely beautiful discovery of the animal, in fact, so that first, then there's the relationship between man and nature, between man and animal, which then widens to nature, to cosmos, and then the whole thing is to be embraced. Is this, could you tell a little bit about your relationship in the work? I mean, even this is your own cat.
My dead cat.
Your own dead cat, but how you have discovered the animal and widen your...
Well, I just started making animals because one was, I dreamt that I should make a Noah's Ark as a death barge. That was one thing. Another was I dreamt that, I said once I saw a bird, that there would be a time in my lifetime where there were fewer birds. And, you know, the New York Times just said 3 days ago that there are 3 billion less birds since 1970 till now. So, you know, I said it, you know, a little later, but I felt that, experienced it, or, and then I started drawing animals, and I started first drawing dead birds, but really just because I went to a college, and I was going to make prints, and the janitor had a collection of dead birds, so he let me draw them, because, you know, if you go to a college to make prints, you have to make a print of something or other. So they had his collection, and then I started doing that, and then I went and did another residency, another college, and they're in Boston, and so I went to Harvard, to the Peabody Museum, and drew the animals, and a woman there started talking to me about what the loss of habitat, the projections of the death of mammals would be in the next 25, 30, 40, 50 years. So it wasn't like, you know, it came to me in a kind of nightmare or something like that. And then I thought like I didn't have to do anything about people anymore, and that I should pay attention to this. And it was also a moment when I always joked that, you know, people started making work about the body in relationship to, and I was never trying to make work about a body. I was just like just doing what I was doing. But then it became more the subject matter of sexuality and sexual identity, and I thought I was at home like being a spinster with my cat, living with my cat. I wasn't having enough sex to be thinking about sexuality in any, you know, deep way. So, and, you know, so I thought other people could take care of that, and, you know, I can go pay attention to animals or something. You know, it's just, you know, it's just like, you know, just the way one day you don't want to wear some color or something like, you know, it's just your life changes and you just go with it, you know, because I mean, I think like being an artist, you don't have to like, I'm not trying to be a good artist or get anywhere with my artwork or something like that. I'm not trying to get it to do anything, or I'm not trying to master anything. It's just having an expression, you know, finding what's meaningful, like discovering for yourself what's meaningful to you in your life. And for me, it helps to do that by making things. But it doesn't, it just goes. You know, and sometimes I find it completely embarrassing, you know, where it's going. Or, but other things, also I have a friend, Meme Bersenbrugger, who's a very good poet, and she's also happens to be married to Richard Tuttle, who is one of our really great American artists. And her work is very much aware of nature, because she lived in New Mexico most of the time. But also about love, you know, and it made me, rather than think that I wanted to, I'm not someone who's so ironic, and the things that I'm attracted to are things that I, you know, in my own fantasy life think are heartfelt, you know, and Meme really, you know, made me think about sentiment and about like showing what you love and what you care for and being willing to expose that more than to make, you know, something cynical or, you know, something else. But so she has been a very, very big influence on me. And Pat Steer, also the painter, has been a very big influence on me. And you know, not necessarily in like an overt way that is understandable, but just their consciousness and presence has been a big influence. You know, but that's how I sort of got into this, you know, making things of animals or making the fairy tales, because I thought that's a place where we overtly see that our identity is intertwined with animals, you know, and plants and things like that.
There is this word of meaningful. So what is meaningful to you and for your life obviously is meaningful for us as we look at your work and feel their deep meaning and their engagement. So when I think about the birds, there is some kind of intention. So when all these thousands of birds you have made as drawings, installations on the wall, on the floor, all dead birds, this always was a reference to an ecological disaster. And these birds you made, I thought, always as a memorial to remember them, but also as a kind of manifesto to rescue them or to take care for the nature. So there is a kind of political implication in doing this.
I just thought I better pay attention, you know, that I should pay attention. Yeah, I mean, I did it because I thought I should pay attention. And I used to cut out every time I saw an article in the newspaper about animals, I cut it out and then I paste them on papers, and I've, you know, lots of pieces of paper like that. You know, I think that's a lot about making things. It's just to pay attention to something.
I think these animals, or the maiden and the animal, this has a lot of warmth, of friendship, of symbiosis, of helping each other, of love. I think when you look at them in the vitrines, there is an enormous kind of intimacy and tenderness.
Yeah. I made them because the Modern Museum asked me if I wanted to make a show in Queens prints, and they said I could make a billboard. And then I was really excited that I could make a billboard. It's never happened, but I thought I wanted to make, after Henri Rousseau's, like the antelope being eaten by, maybe it's the white antelope being eaten by the leopard or something, or the lion eating the animals. And yeah, I made these ones, and I don't know. I was thinking a lot about how many animals in the world disembody through being eaten. You know, we, like in general, just get to croak kind of on our own. But most things are immediately feeding. We have to feed the earth slower. Like we have to become the earth slower than most things, rather than being dinner. And then, you know, I was thinking like you always want to get out of your body or get out of your, you know, ego existence. And so to me, they were really like, yeah, something about being cut out of your ego existence and being eaten alive. You know, but, you know, just like weird things that I sit around thinking about, you know, it's not, but then I also saw, and I had a show at the Angewandte Kunstmuseum in 1993. Donald Judd had a room about this size, and he showed a small porcelain room, but then he showed this dessert, you know, these enormous porcelain desserts from the 1800s of, you know, little figurines to entertain people at dinner. And, you know, I had only seen really bad versions of that in people's living rooms in America. But I thought I want to make one. And so I made the ones first with the animals, and then I made another bigger one of like 23 or so figures based on Pietro Longhi paintings for some weird reason. But you know, it's just, yeah, because that's an incredible form. Porcelain figurines is like one of the great forms. The way coins here are one of the great forms or metal. People working with metals. These are incredible artistic forms that are completely fascinating to play in, and you have to do it to learn. You know, to learn it, you have to do it.
But talking about meaning, I just think to see this piece, which is at the exhibition as well, which is bronze, and then you put on layers of gold and colors. The title is Harmonies. And I thought that showing the animal and the human being as we here sit in this incredible installation of the girl and the sheep, is this something you think it has to do with a possible, what means symbiosis, but with a resurrection, or with a healing, or with a hope, or with a reconciliation is the word, between nature and human beings, that this is a kind of utopia you show?
This is like my Catholic Holy Ghost fantasies, really. I wanted to make, I made 4 of them, because I wanted to make a chapel. I'm always telling everyone I want to make chapels, and no one ever asked me, but I got to make a synagogue window once, and so then I thought it's a lot easier making a synagogue window than it is to, because people have more autonomy. Individual synagogues have more autonomy. But yeah, I'm making my own fantasy. You know, a lot of my work is very Catholic, I must admit. You know, that's the source of it. And, you know, and I've also been in Munich, you know, painting stained glass for 20 years, sort of making my fantasy chapel life. You know, and normally I sort of don't say things like that, but it's just the truth anyway, so who cares? Yeah, this was the life of the Virgin Mary, based on my mother.
Yeah, there is so many work to show, and perhaps we could have a look at the tapestries, because this is perhaps a kind of vision of a cosmos which embraces everything. You remember we have this beautiful space here. I think there are 5 or 6 tapestries. These are all from recent years, and I think they are beautiful in their motifs, in their colors. Perhaps you would like to talk about the tapestries, because this is something also coming from the the past and coming also from a religious context, in fact.
But I was saying that when I was in my late 20s, my sister had moved here, I guess, and my mother and I came to visit her, and then I said, I want to go to Angers to see the apocalyptic tapestries. And to me, that, like, if you haven't ever left Paris, you should leave and go to Angers to see the apocalyptic tapestries, because it's one of the best things on earth, and it's in your country. And it's even better than practically everything here in Paris, but that might be debatable. but it's really a great wonder of the world. And for me, I never thought I would make tapestries because, like the Gobelin, it's very slow, and I'm way too lazy to learn weaving, to weave something. But I also couldn't imagine that happening, although that is happening also. But because of the jacquard loom and because of the computer, it's possible for many artists now to be working in tapestry, like Grace and Perry, who had a show here, and William Kandritz, and Carlos Garricoa from Cuba. I mean, many artists are working, but many are working using the jacquard loom in Belgium. And that was, to me, to make a kind of synthesis between, in my fantasy life, between medieval time and hippie art and the Roaring Twenties, that I thought those things all have some aspect of spectacle. Like, I always think they're earnest times of earnesty, but also of spectacle. And so I tried to mix up these images. But then I moved upstate, and then all my ideas about the Roaring Twenties went out the window, and I just started making things about, what I saw on my road in general. But I think we have to stop now, or we have to ask people to ask questions if they want.
Yeah, I just thought there are so many images.
We can just
we will
click
not
them.
get through all of them, but I think it's wonderful to have a look at the very end at these.
That one's nice. The next
tapestries.
one's
The
nice.
next
So
one
that was
is
my,
nice.
the first one I made. That's still the best one, I think, but that had the most of my intention. But, you can see I can wander on, from here to kingdom come about nothing. So we can allow you to resume the rest of your life, but I would definitely go to Angers. Because that is, there was one sculpture in the Louvre I saw that's also one of the best things I ever saw in my life, but Angers is something really to learn from. And we can say if anybody wants to ask questions.
So this is a very abrupt end.
Yeah, we have to. We're going to get in trouble.
Yeah, I think you have the exhibition, you have the beautiful catalog. There are so many things to learn about Kiki. But you still, in fact, are invited by the artist to have a few questions. And Stephanie, you would help us with the microphone, and if anybody would like to ask something to Kiki Smith, that would be really
it's a
nice.
slippery slope asking me a question.
Is there any question? I just wondered if you'd like to say a word or two about the sculpture with the woman and the hanging hair who's up on the wall.
That was a sculpture of a Jesus. Yeah, it's a Jesus, and it was a form. My favorite form of Jesus is the deposition. That's always the most meaningful to me. This like the body being limp weight, and in the depositions you feel that weight, that it's so moving. The sadness of the dead body. But when I was in New Mexico, I used to live in New Mexico or work in New Mexico, and I saw in someone's house a little Jesus like that. And I had never seen that form of the Jesus, and it was just very little. And so when I went back to New York, I wanted to make it, and then I made it with, I asked my neighbor, this guy that lived next door, if I could cast his body. So I made like a plaster bandage of the bottom of his body, and then he had to go to lunch. I mean, he didn't have to go to lunch, he had to go to work. And then, so I cast the top of my body because I wanted to get it done, you know, and it wasn't really like an idea. It was just like I just wanted to get it done because I thought, you know, I could wait another 2 weeks before the guy has time to come back to my house, and I didn't have time for that. So, so then I made the top of my body, and then I asked Ann Hamilton had a exhibition at the Dia Foundation, and she had horsehair everywhere. So and they were taking it down, so I asked her if I could have some horsehair because this little Jesus had horsehair, and you know, which often Jesuses or sculptures are using horsehair, and so I put the horsehair on it. You know, and it was like two sexes or combined, and you know, but I didn't really even think about it. I mean, I just did it, but then I thought, oh, that's good. It's more inclusive, you know, has all the aspects of divinity, you know, or two parts of aspects. I mean, there are many other aspects of divinity, but they can coexist together and also not explode. So how was that? And I used to make work with paper. I mean, used to make all my work out of paper mache. Like the woman on pyre, that was made from paper mache and then cast in bronze.
Hello. How do you were involved in the exhibition, and do you like it?
Yeah. You know, we work together, Camille and I, and her whole team, and my whole team. We work together, and you know, part of it is like one's fantasy life, what one wants to show, and the other part is what is available to show. And, you know, we try to mix up all these things in some, you know, feasible, pragmatic, practical way. And then we made little models at home and sent them. And then I came and everything was pretty laid out, and then we just, you know, turn it this way and that way, and it was very good to work. I mean, it's beautiful here. You know, it's like, I can go back to, you know, like being in my little living room working on the kitchen table, so might as well take, you know, if you're given this kind of space in life, you know, it's dangerous, you don't want to get too used to it, but to have, you know, one or two or several times in your life, it's not bad.
I had a question about music, if that plays a part in your work, if you listen to music.
I like listening to birds the best in real life, and, you know, in reality, I like just listening to what's outside, not the traffic here, but the birds. And I listen to music. I have friends that are musicians, and I go see them. And but I find, like in working, I don't, in general, listen to music too much because it's I can't think. I listen to it in workshops, in foundries, and other people's places. I really like listening to music. But at home, I don't listen to music so much. I like it in real life or in other people's spaces. It's not good. I mean, it would be better to have more music, but we didn't grow up with it, really. I mean, my mother was a singer, opera singer, but we didn't grow up with much artificial music, like radios and things like that, television or radio.
I have one question coming from my experience through the show. There is a girl with the bandage on her knees, in the back there, and it talked to me about, 2 days ago, a woman was tortured and left dead in North Syria. She's called Evrin Khalaf. She's an activist, pro-Kurdish activist. And when her mother came to recognize her, she says her daughter was like a doll with bandage. This reminds me of this. And so I was wondering if, as a woman or not maybe as a woman, what how grieving was part of your work, and did it push you to sometimes create through grieving?
You know, I would say lots of times why I'm making something is just some tangential thing bombarding me at the moment. But, you know, because I made that Virgin Mary, the little Virgin Mary with the stars, and I had made a version of her standing up, and then I was going to make this kneeling one, and I just put the bandages on because it was wax that I was trying to hold together, you know, but then it was like that, was real like that, because that's, you know, for children in the world, it's the most disgusting. We are the most disgusting to children, you know, and because they're the most vulnerable, and, you know, so, yeah, it just made it like that, but it wasn't like I was thinking, oh, I'm going to try to make something like that. I just made it. And then I recognized it as something to have like that, you know, because, oh, we're scary. We're a scary bunch, all of us together. You know, I don't know why that's necessary, but it seems how it is. Yeah. So you're dismissed.
So I want to give my
Okay. Okay. We
Yeah,
can
in
say
fact,
thank
then
you.
we say thank you.
Thank
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.